Fighting game intros are a bit of a lost art these days. Their initial purpose was to attract customers to the arcade cabinet. These devs would do anything they could to grab eyeballs, from showing quick cuts, the gameplay, story tidbits, cinematic cutscenes, or the dirty trick of flashing lights on the screen repeatedly, these sequences being called the attract mode. As arcades became less prevalent, the need to lure a player in the same way had to evolve. These attract modes would then become more of a cinematic intro for a game, being a showcase of gameplay or its world, and a lot of times a mix of the two. These could then be made into a trailer to be shown at a trade show like an E3, or posted on sites like Game Trailers, IGN, or YouTube. Nowadays, these are mostly for YouTube, Twitter, or even TikTok. IGN and other gaming sites still repost trailers, which sometimes provides a bigger platform than the company making the game itself. Nowadays, these cinematics aren't in the game anymore. Most cinematic trailers just stay on YouTube and aren't repurposed as an intro for the game itself, and each series handles these attract mode and cinematic openings differently. Looking at the Street Fighter series first. Since this IP is so old, it makes it easier to see the evolution of fighting game intros from 1987 all the way until now. Without further ado, here's the first Street Fighter opening in its entirety. It was 1987, they didn't know any better. Yeah, this was just Joe punching the wall to turn around and reveal the logo for the game. Joe isn't even the main character, but allegedly he was supposed to be until it was changed to Ryu. I guess this intro gives a tough guy impression, like you gotta be one tough dude to play this game. At least you think that until it cuts the gameplay, since that may detract you more than anything. In this very early era for the genre, you'd be lucky to even get an intro like this. Usually it'd just be the title screen idling, or cuts the gameplay and score rankings. The original release of Street Fighter II does have a much more interesting attract mode, with two dudes who are not playable wrapping up a street fight. The camera pans up at the skyscraper in the background to reveal the logo with the iconic Street Fighter II theme in the background. Gonna say this a lot, but this scene is iconic and is probably one of the most famous fighting game intros out there. It's even been parodied and referenced by other video games. Capcom stuck with this intro in future versions of the 2 by just tweaking the colors a bit. I get them not wanting to use anyone from the Street Fighter cast, since it lets everyone be on equal footing in a way, not letting one character look lesser than another by having them get punched instead of this dude. The easy answer would just be to show Ryu and Ken, since both are from the last game. That'd be a good way to establish who the main characters are. But perhaps they wouldn't be the favorites in its sequel, so the devs opted to have non-playable characters instead. Doing this, maybe the devs thought that this would bring the idea and concept of Street Fighter to life a bit better, since it conveys that a fight could be with anyone, anywhere. The song here is what I consider to be the Street Fighter II theme. It's very catchy, upbeat, and again, iconic. This song was even used for Ryu's theme in Marvel vs. Capcom 1, which I think is perfect since he's essentially Mr. Street Fighter. Capcom couldn't stick with this intro forever though if they were gonna keep releasing updates, so to make it more distinct and recognizable as a new game, they needed to change it up. You think they wouldn't be able to follow it with something that's as iconic, but you'd be wrong. Street Fighter II: The New Challengers struck lightning twice with this one. It's much more theatrical with the darkness and flashes of light. The music's tone is still pretty upbeat though, with an edgier vibe emphasized by the crack of the lightning. This intro is used in all future versions with some changes here and there. Super Turbo has a different vibe, being much more dramatic and shows off Cammy and Chun-Li posing on the bridge in Cammy's stage, adding in some foreshadowing of the brand new sinister character Akuma. This was pretty much the only hint you'd be getting that he even exists. No more using non-playable characters. Capcom had fully leaned into Ryu being the face of the series at this point. HD Remix was gonna have this intro too, but was cut due to storage space limitations, and it's a shame that even the most recent version, Ultra Street Fighter 2, didn't use it even all these years later. This opening may be more famous than the first one, and was even used as Ryu's reveal trailer for Smash Bros. Wii U. Granted, for DLC characters, they didn't do the insane cinematic trailers they did for Ultimate, so it was probably cheaper to have Ryu's model in the shadows to replicate this intro. It's still rad to see nonetheless. Street Fighter Alpha or Zero has Ryu and Ken in a fighting stance facing off in an open field. Perhaps this is paying homage to the new Challengers intro with Ryu, since it's again dark out in a thunderstorm and ends on a Hadoken with its light enveloping the screen. In between the Ryu and Ken fight, it cuts the gameplay, which I think was important since it establishes that this isn't just another Street Fighter 2. The art style is far more anime now, and I appreciate that this new design is showcased in both the gameplay and in the cinematic. Alpha 2 merges scenes with gameplay and quick cuts and shows all of these characters off. It even ends with Ryu and Ken again in the same field, but this time the camera is angled in front of them for the final Hadoken. The frequent color changes here I'm sure caught the attention of a lot of players, and this is one of my personal favorites. Alpha 3 just says fuck it and goes full on sensory overload with the visuals. A lot of art and gameplay of characters flashing by with lightning fast quotes and unreadable words just stuffed in every corner. You'd think that this intro would be just a jumbled mess, but it's so fast and frantic I feel it almost represents Alpha 3's energy and speed perfectly. This game had a style completely different than the first two Alpha games, and this opening sets the stage for that before you even put in your first coin. Street Fighter 3 heads in a different direction, with all three versions having some quick cuts to still images with concept art flashing on screen. It's very low energy compared to the Alpha games. With New Generation, perhaps they did this minimalist approach due to being confident in the branding of this being Street Fighter 3. Maybe the mindset was, after all this time without a proper sequel to 2, people would see the 3 logo and have to play it. Word of mouth this was finally Street Fighter 3 would have people coming in droves. Sadly, no. This entry and its future versions flopped hard. I think Capcom had Second Impact's gameplay actually show in attack mode this time to say, hey guys, look, this is actually Street Fighter, in addition to showing how large and beautiful these sprites were. People still didn't seem to be biting. Third Strike just goes back to the budget approach and returns to the still images. The music in Third Strike's attack mode is excellent though, and represents the new hip-hop theming of Third Strike well. Despite the cool tune, these intros are pretty weak. Perhaps with Street Fighter 3, it just wasn't in the budget to make a more elaborate attack mode, especially since the later versions weren't exactly making a lot of money. It could even be an issue of memory limitations, but regardless, seems to have been low on the priorities. With Street Fighter 4, we entered a new age, now with a focus on the more cinematic openers. The first version of Street Fighter 4, the one that was in the arcades only, returns with a bout between Ryu and Ken, possibly a nod to the Alpha opening. They're fighting in a Japanese brushstroke style, which is a little dishonest since the gameplay doesn't look like this, but the intro keeps it simple in its premise since it's a return to form for the series. What better way to show that than having two of the most iconic characters showcased? This also ends with Ryu shooting his Hadoken, filling the screen with light. It was later repurposed in the first home console release. This version of the intro takes the original arcade attack mode and pushes it to the next level. You all know why too, the song Indestructible by the group Exile. This song is very J-pop and is super catchy. I remember most people hating on this song, but it seems like they came back around to it after all this time. The original version of the song actually features Flo Rida, but in the intro version he's cut and people probably have no idea his segment is even in the song. Can't play it too much since this is a licensed tune, this being the first time Street Fighter used a licensed song for its intro, but not the last. The opening stitches the cinematic trailers that were released before the home port and re-edits them to be part of this glorious opening, with fights between Akuma and Goken, Guile and Abel, and so on throughout. They all have very different primary colors being used, but have the same unified art style. Sometimes it can be a bit difficult to tell what's going on in each of the fights, but that's a really minor nitpick. This intro is actually broken up into two sections, the first being the indestructible part until it transitions to the Street Fighter IV theme, which is a theme I'd have stuck in my head for a long time. It adds this air of shit's getting real. I think this even shows the canonical depiction of what happened to Goken from his fight with Akuma too. The music gets quiet briefly to great effect, letting this moment sink in all the more. This is probably my favorite out of all of these intro songs, and it's a crying shame it's never seen again. I know it costs money for Capcom to use, but it'd be nice to see him bust it out again, or at least remix it. Indestructible even extended to the character select, and that version is amazing too. Oh well. Street Fighter X Tekken does a similar method of repurposing trailer footage to a licensed song. Here though, I think the cuts to different characters are more jarring and abrupt. Street Fighter IV, it let the scenes breathe more and allowed you to process what you were seeing. Most people probably wouldn't even know that these were all separate, stitched together trailers. Cross Tekken, on the other hand, comes off as a AMV someone posted on YouTube, just wanting to show as many scenes as possible. Perhaps the cuts are quicker because the song is more intense than Indestructible, which would make sense. I just don't think it works here despite me liking the song a lot. One could argue that this more frantic editing adds to the chaotic nature a crossover game is expected to bring. Normally, I'd agree with the statement if it weren't for the liquid stylization. This can sometimes make things harder to interpret, but thankfully it is clearer than Street Fighter IV's. This type of editing though would be a disaster paired with that art direction. The opening for Super Street Fighter IV is thankfully pretty solid. Gone is the use of a licensed song in favor of doing more of a character-themed medley, but the music just doesn't hit like it did with Vanilla 4. You got less of the abstract ink style and more of a mix between drawn and inked. It's also much easier to see all the action. The motif of Ryu and Ken fighting returns, so maybe this is a continuation of their previous fight in the last cinematic in 4. This has more of a focus on the new additions, with the scenes being much longer and filled with character interactions. You've got shenanigans with Ibuki and Guy to show the contrast in their personalities despite both being ninjas, with Ibuki being a prankster and Guy being more disciplined. It also sets the stage that Juri is a major threat since she's able to take on both Cammy and Chun-Li at the same time. I don't think this would have had the same impact if the scenes were cut up and spread out though, like in the previous opener. With the Arcade Edition update, there was no added cinematic, but with the final update Ultra Street Fighter IV, the Super version intro was changed out. This was mainly the previous cinematics cut up and re-edited with a new song. There is some new footage to showcase the latest additions to the cast, which mimics the Super 4 art style. The music I'm not a huge fan of. It does bring a more exciting energy than the previous one, but this tune just can't stack up. It's cool that they bothered to make a new one, but I think I'd prefer them keeping the Super version. All of 4's intros, however, are way better than Vanilla 5's. This was so basic. I think I'm harsh on it because the song just isn't as interesting and is far more low-key than the previous cinematic ones. If this were just for an update for Street Fighter IV, then it would do fine. But as the next numbered entry of the series, I'm looking at this a bit more critically. While watching, you'd think that Necalli is a threat in the story, or that Bison and Charlie Nash are gonna have an epic face-off and be evenly matched. Those factors really soured me on it since the actual story undermines all of this. Despite this being more of a story-focused opening, what's happening isn't all too interesting, mainly focusing on a fight with Bison. The matchups here are pretty limited and all boil down to Bison since the roster itself was very limited. I do like the idea of having creative uses with color and the lack of it. This isn't horrible or anything, it's just very middle of the road. Capcom made up for this in spades though, because when Season 3 debuted, they showed a cinematic that was the new intro for the game. This was how all the season's characters were revealed, which I think is the coolest one they've done for the series. The vanilla song was more rock-inspired and serious, but this one is upbeat and electronic, which I think goes better with the visuals. The art direction here is more appealing as well. Characters have their own unique biome to represent them, and it occasionally cuts to Ryu showcasing the journey with other warriors he's crossed with. This intro replaced the original one after Season 3, and if you let the main menu go idle, it plays this one instead. If you try and view the original one in the gallery, it only has an abridged version viewable. I don't know what happened with Street Fighter 6, this is the most tragic one of them all. The intro is more a trailer for the modes than anything. I'd say this would be a good launch trailer, but horrible as the opening for the next numbered Street Fighter. Perhaps they cut it for budget reasons, or maybe they'll do it later as more characters are added, but as it stands, this is the most disappointing one by far. I would have loved to see a new cinematic with the incredible style this title has. Seems like a waste. I don't want to end this section on the dud that is Street Fighter 6's opening, so let's discuss some crossover titles. With the early Capcom vs. games such as X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Marvel Super Heroes vs. Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom 1, and both Capcom vs. SNK titles, they weren't above doing the flashing screen trick for easy attention. But beyond the epilepsy, the intros were loud and bombastic and captured the energy of this new faster hyperfighting, with the announcers blaring with excitement and the visuals absolutely matching that. Marvel vs. Capcom 1 in particular does go overboard with the flashing, but I love the pure sensory overload of the characters on screen and the insane amount of color and movement. All three of these end with their powerful logos front and center. A very underrated announcer is from Marvel Super Heroes vs. Street Fighter. He just brings that hype with his voice, almost like he could be commentating a game show or something.
Don't miss the most amazing tag team fighting game ever! Are you ready for a new challenger? Right now, experience Marvel Super Heroes vs. Street Fighter!
The energy in Marvel vs. Capcom 2's Attract mode is chilled out a bit. Not a bad thing, of course, since it matches its new jazzy vibe. If you didn't have all of the characters unlocked, be it in the arcade or home version, those characters are silhouettes, leaving the player to see that there's more secrets to be uncovered and wonder who else could possibly be in this game. I do appreciate that they acknowledge that this is the 4th game in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, which is easy for folks to forget, like how Soul Calibur 6 is the 7th game in the Soul Calibur series. This intro ends on my favorite logo reveal, which comes in much slower and smoother than the previous entries. This logo screen is my personal favorite for maybe any fighter ever and is peak Aqua aesthetic. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 Fate of the Two Worlds has one of my personal faves. Up to the release, Capcom was putting out cinematic trailers with different groups of Marvel and Capcom characters facing off against the villain, and these were always a blast to watch. I truly wish stuff with production quality like this was more so in the actual game. The subtitle was Fate of Two Worlds, which led me to believe there would be some focus on story. But shocker, there wasn't much beyond these trailers and character endings. One of the first trailers most people saw for MVC3 was repurposed as the opening. This more so focuses on the matchups between each company's most recognizable characters. The pairings make perfect sense too, with Ryu and Wolverine acting as the face of their respective companies. But they also have a history being paired up from earlier entries, which is probably the main factor Ryu isn't paired with someone made famous by the MCU like Iron Man. Instead, Iron Man is paired up with Morgan, who acts as a perfect foil to his lady killer persona. Hulk and Chris Redfield may seem like a mismatch on the surface, but when you think about their personal history, I think it works. Hulk defends himself against the military all of the time, and Chris is a one-man army who works for the US government, which personifies that. He also fights oversized monsters, creatures who are created by people screwing with science, and Hulk is one of the defining characters in fiction with that background. Deadpool and Dante was a matchup people were dreaming up about before these two were even announced as characters, both being wisecracking, gun and sword-toting users that can't seem to die. We cut between these fights and some even bleed into each other. I find it funny that Chris is trying to help up Morgan, like, girl, you're just being dramatic, you can fly. There's an odd note at the end where everyone stops fighting to see Dormammu come from the sky. This guy wasn't the final boss, nor does he have a large role in what little story this game has. Allegedly, Dormammu was intended to be the final boss until it was changed to Galactus. Dormammu showing up at the end with his boss change can be recontextualized as the villain showing up to beat the real threat to both sides. He's also shown fighting alongside these same guys in future trailers. That little part at the end alone tells me that this was never intended as an opening, but rather just as a trailer. This opening does still work, and of this trailer series, this was the best choice among them as an intro, since the other ones focus on the more obscure characters. I do wish the final trailer with Wolverine finally reaching out to Ryu was woven into this one somehow. Having the first trailer be Ryu reaching out his hand while dazed, and the last trailer be calling back to that is some Scorsese shit. This opening gives me the vibe of old friends meeting for the first time. What I mean by that is that even though this is the 5th Marvel vs. Capcom game, these characters barely have any interactions with each other. The endings were the only thing we'd get, so this opening marked a change. Now we could finally view how these characters would fight each other or play off of one another. No one does any talking in these, but I think that was a stylistic choice to focus on the action. Or maybe they just didn't want to deal with dubbing and lip syncing any dialogue. Regardless, the characters' personalities still come across well. For Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, they took a different angle. This time, they had characters idle in these 3D snapshots of them mid-action. It showed Marvel and Capcom characters facing off and teaming up with one another, and most of these weren't matchups you'd expect. Finding some characters did become a game of Where's Waldo though. Jill didn't have the camera focused on her, so I didn't notice her until way later. As for Akuma, the dude is a pixel in the background. I got a feeling they just forgot him. You can't see the full version anywhere in the game disc itself, the intro is shortened. The full one is only officially available on YouTube, but why was this not included in the bonuses? In my eyes, the full version is just as good as the vanilla Marvel 3 intro. It has this awesome ramp up with the music and things sound like they're escalating despite no one moving. One little nitpick though is I did find it odd that Magneto is facing off against Galactus alone. Magneto is a strong dude, but he's not on Galactus' level, like why aren't the other characters here, or why not like Dormammu or something? Now let's discuss Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite's opening. There is none. A series that hits it out of the park almost every time is the Tekken series, specifically on their home console versions. If we look at the series' arcade intros, they were extremely brief, which makes sense considering that they wanted you to see the gameplay more than anything. This was in an era where early Tekkens were a graphical showcase. 3D fighters like this stood out from the crowd amongst the plethora of 2D ones at the arcade. The cinematic cutscenes were supposed to help capture that initial attention. These FMVs weren't being sold like it was supposed to be actual gameplay or anything, but it was still vying for that same attention, being another way to show off their visual style with expensive graphics. The arcade version of Tekken 1 had Kazuya standing menacingly and just doing some moves alone. It's super brief, but conveys in a short amount of time that this main character is much more serious and intimidating than someone who had the same archetype, for example, Tekken's competitors like Ryu or Akira. When the first Tekken dropped on PS1, they showcased little vignettes of the main cast, which I think is an even better idea than just having Kazuya get all the focus. That way you can sell the buyer on all the characters after all. It's comprised of quick cuts between characters and music, but does offer enough of a glimpse on who each one is. For example, Nina holding a gun with a spotlight on her shows that she's in some sort of trouble, and perhaps this is just a daily occurrence for her. It adds to her mystique, like who is this person on the run? Not only is this FMV a showcase of Tekken, but also the PS1 as a whole. They use videos like this all the time to demonstrate what the PS1 was capable of. 3D models show that games on this console had evolved and that we were moving into a new era no longer limited to just 2D sprites. Tekken 2's arcade opening is also very brief, with Heihachi opening his mouth menacingly and a mechanical logo fading in. This doesn't really hit me since an ominous cinematic tone doesn't suit Tekken 2. The music I think is unnecessarily dramatic. Perhaps this atmosphere could work if they were conveying that the big scary final boss of the last game was back. I see this mechanical logo as an evolution of the same motif from the first game, though a more elaborate one. I am grateful it was dropped in future games, though I don't really think it suits the series. The console intro, on the other hand, is the perfect evolution of this intro style from the first game. Each character has more time to breathe and is accompanied by even more elaborate environments to better reflect the character. These intros take the drama a step further by showing the stakes at hand. King's become an alcoholic and struggles to regain his former honor. Michelle had something and someone taken from her. And of course, we see Heihachi climbing up from the mountain he was dropped from, swearing his revenge on Kazuya. These scenes convey so much without a word of dialogue. Let's take this shot at Kazuya. He's not in his karate outfit anymore, rather dressed in a suit and looking out the window of a skyscraper. He extends his hand out and his reflection stares back at him. Is he reaching out to this world that he now controls? Or is he reaching out to himself, the one thing he can't control now, having lost his way between his newfound wealth and the devil inside him? The music is upbeat and electronic, much less ominous than the arcade version. Most of the secret characters have a little appearance as well, showing the player there's more to be discovered beyond the initial cast. This opening sets the scene that this game is meant to be taken seriously and demonstrates how quickly the status quo has changed, something that is done again, debatably even better with the next entry. Since Tekken 3 is a huge time jump in the plot, what's showcased is mostly the next generation. You've got Forest Law and King being the successors of their Tekken 2 counterparts, but also newcomers like Xiaoyu and Eddie. This intro starts with some build-up with Heihachi witnessing the new Big Bad's destruction of his Tekken force. Once Heihachi realizes the challenge at hand, the music ramps up. Like with Tekken 2, you get a glimpse of what each character's story is while simultaneously acting as an introduction to the new blood. The graphics have also vastly improved. It's hard to believe this game is on the same hardware as the previous Tekken, and it came out less than 2 years later. I appreciate this FMV much more when you compare it to competition at the time. If you look at something like the Urgai's intro, on paper it has the same structure, but is executed less cleanly. It shows all of their characters briefly while giving some insight into who they are. However, the music changes so frequently with each character that it's disorienting. Maybe not having a strong song is why there are so many sound effects playing to distract from that. Tekken 3's audio, on the other hand, is just this one theme. No sound effects or voice clips, just a hype-ass tune. I wish this song was remixed or used in other titles. The only other appearance I can think of is in Namco Cross Capcom, where it's used as King's theme. I do wish, with Jin shown at the end, we got a bit more of him than just reacting to being marked by Ogre or Devil, if that's what this thing is. Jin is a guy we don't know reacting to something we don't understand. It's way too brief and gives nothing that enlightens us about Jin as a character. Just a small gripe on an otherwise fantastic intro. Tekken Tag 1's theme song is probably the most well-known, being used in a number of entries. Since the tag games aren't canonical to the overall plot, Namco decided to instead focus on the day-to-day lives of specific characters. I assume these occur at different points in time since Kazuya is alive. Maybe his scenes are when he ruled the Zaibatsu during 2? Either way, I love the slice of life angle since it shows more what the characters do beyond just fighting. Except for Brian, that dude is always beefing with someone. Tekken 4 is a game that oozes personality. It has a unique aesthetic that no other entry has been able to match in terms of sheer aura. That being said, it pains me to say that this intro is probably the most disappointing of the bunch. The atmosphere has a more gritty and serious vibe, which is fine, but the focus is squarely on Kazuya and his return. This blew my mind as a kid because I legitimately didn't expect Kazuya to return. I thought he was gonna stay dead and just appear in non-canon games like Tag Tournament. After that initial shock, and with some hindsight, I don't think this intro aged well. I wish more characters were shown, at least beyond just the glimpses of the 3 newcomers, and I'm saying this as someone who loves Kazuya and says that Tekken 4 is her favorite entry too. This is also the debut of characters talking. It may sound crazy, but before Tekken 4, it was rare for anyone to speak. I know there were moments where they spoke in a rare win pose and in Julia's ending from 3, but it was far and few in between. This intro marked the beginning of Heihachi and Kazuya yapping away. That said, I prefer that they didn't talk at all in this intro. Them talking is the likely culprit on why the song is more atmospheric and unmemorable to avoid other distractions. The title was meant to be more grounded and story focused, but unfortunately this intro only serves to make the world seem smaller. With the previous intros, you see rapid-fire glimpses into each character's world, where there's a lot more story than just the family rivalry between the Mishimas. To be fair, you do get a tiny bit of that with the 3 new characters, but these seem out of place compared to the Kazuya stuff. With what little time they have, you see that Christy is a colorful, playful character that contrasts with the gritty world of Tekken 4. Marduk, on the other hand, fits right in. Steve gets the most attention of the 3, showing off his boxing skills with a hint of cockiness. Personally, I think it would have been better to not include these new characters at all here, since it distracts from the Kazuya story. I don't like the Mishima focus, but at least go all the way if you're gonna do it. The arcade version mainly has that focus, and I think it's better for it. These new characters just get in the way. It'd be one thing if Christy was looking for Kazuya for revenge, or Steve had his fight fixed by Heihachi, but these are just random interruptions. This gritty style even retroactively applies to when we flash back to the second game. I remember Heihachi throwing him off in a very red and actively exploding volcano, but here it just looks inactive. Maybe they're perhaps retconning that Kazuya was actually dunked in magma, I don't know. Having watched all of the Tekken intros back to back, this is the first miss for me. The next one though, oh boy, this one is refreshing to say the least. Tekken 5's intro might be so good that anything after just can't measure up. Taking place immediately after Jin's ending in 4, it opens with Kazuya and Heihachi defending themselves from an onslaught of jacks. The choreography is a spectacle to behold. Kazuya and Heihachi, for the first time, are fighting together. We go back and forth between them as they one-shot Jack 4s. This section was so good that Tekken 7 used these cutscenes as is for when you recreate this in the story mode. After Kazuya dips out, Heihachi is left to die by explosion, which sets up the story well, ending on Heihachi's death. But, I mean, come on, Heihachi is fine, he's just sleeping. You'd think this would be the end of it, but nope, here's the second half accompanied by the song Sparking. Since there's so many characters in this entry, most of the returning cast only get very quick glimpses, but it works well with the fast energy of the song. I believe for the first time ever in a Tekken intro, 2 different Tekken characters are actually fighting each other. Usually you just have someone in their own environment, highlighting their world, and the newer characters get that spotlight here. Asuka and Fang get that special attention, which really helps flesh out their story like the early Tekken games. Fang killing his master is a particularly striking shot. The quality of the renders here, I would argue, have yet to be topped. Even the CG Tekken movie's art direction doesn't look as good as this. The format of essentially having 2 different intros is the ideal template for me. Getting the plot-focused first half and the music video latter half is the best of both worlds. This is certainly the crown jewel of this series, and to this day, people still use this to compare it to other opening sequences. One intro a lot of people seem to forget is Tekken 5 Dark Resurrections. The arcade and PS3 versions show a heavily trimmed down cut with more of a focus on the new characters. The complete uncut version is exclusively on PSP. This has a totally different vibe than the original release, having more of a determined tone and showing different characters reflecting on what I assume is their reason for wanting to win the Iron Fist tournament. It starts with Jinpachi escaping his imprisonment, whereas the previous intro ends on him right after his tomb is destroyed. There's also a stronger focus on the contrast in worlds between the 2 newbies, Lily and Dragunov. Lily with a life of luxury who for the first time is having to fight for her life, and Dragunov who lives in a world of constant strife. Look at how amazing Lily's hair looks. We've come a long way from Tekken 2. The final scene ends with Heihachi rising from a grave. If you're watching these intros back to back, it's kinda funny seeing how fast Raven was wrong in reporting his death. Tekken can do more serious intros well as demonstrated here as opposed to 4's. I'm curious as to why Armor King wasn't highlighted since he was a new returning character in this updated version. Perhaps they thought he was too goofy looking to be in a more solemn intro. They also opt out of using the new Dark Resurrection colors for everyone, but I assume the color swap was a late addition that couldn't be reflected in the cutscenes. This isn't as good as the original Tekken 5 opening, but is certainly one of the better ones we'll get for a long time. With one step forward, we take another one back. The 6th Tekken has the same issue as the 4th game being a downgrade from that hype-ass intro. I know it's a tall ask to top 5s, but at least they could have tried. The focus is on Jin's war against Kazuya, and I'm not a fan of the war theming that started with this entry. It's all dramatic and serious, which is fine, but the stakes are at a ridiculous level. I suppose we can't be having martial art tournament drama forever, so maybe Namco thought that this was the only way the stakes could be escalated. But this intro is just a small drop in the bucket as to why I hate the war arc. It showcases the newbies just like the earlier games, and thankfully does a better job of setting them up in this entry than in 4's. Miguel, Leo, and Zafina all actually have a thread with the war theming we saw in the beginning, where we're shown the personal losses this conflict took from Miguel and Leo. Through Zafina, we're shown the true threat that may be at fault when she unearths Azazel. Bob, though, doesn't seem to have the same through line. It's kind of a mismatch in tone seeing this dude stop a robbery, but overall, not a deal breaker. In the home version, if you wait a little on the title screen, another video plays in the rotation with Jin driving his motorcycle through Kazuya's army. In between, you've got gameplay and even more new characters spliced in, making this more effective as an intro. If they replaced the gameplay with CG clips though, that would have been a vast improvement. They wouldn't even need to connect to the motorcycle chaser war theme, since the scenes transitioning from TV to TV would give off a channel flipping vibe. The end shot of Kazuya and Jin punching each other is a perfect glimpse on what the Tekken series is about as a whole. I think Namco supports this because in every entry since, the Namco logo has had that same imagery. This one isn't amazing since it's so short, but I much prefer it to the one most players would see on booting the game up. Yet another course correction, Tekken Tag 2 brings back the fun with gags and charming character interactions, something I wish was in all of these intros. This time, the arcade and home console openings are both equal in length and quality. It's interesting they don't go wild with showing off the large cast, but instead focus on the actual tagging, which is more aligned with the spirit of the game. The average player would probably use a mismatched pair like Heihachi and Miguel, not being a pair that makes sense in the lore, but rather just two random characters that aren't really associated with one another. The home version features the more fantastical characters like Ogre and Angel, which conveys to the fans that story be damned, since Angel and Ogre have never crossed over in the story before. Plus, this matchup is just too cool not to use as a striking visual. The song is an EDM remix of the original Tekken tags, which is a wise choice since EDM gives that hype at a live event vibe. The original mix being mostly piano is more fitting to show these characters' day-to-day lives. This is pure fighting thrills, so you can't do that again here. The piano segments in Tag 2 are here mainly to pay homage to the last game. Tekken 7, I think I'm starting to see a pattern here. This opening cannot be concise to save its life. The intro displays mostly cutscenes from the story mode, and it's much more serious in tone than all the past games, even 6. It effectively builds up tension for the alleged final showdown between Kazuya and Heihachi. The credits of the developers slowly roll in like an opening to a movie. Characters that aren't Mishimas are barely shown off beyond Akuma. I do kinda wish this was broken up into 2 parts, maybe have the little music video opening in the first half, but end on a serious note for the second half. It contrasts well against 5, where the fun times are over and shit's getting serious. I won't deny the shot of Heihachi shedding a tear is a striking visual. Dude rarely shows remorse over anything, so this is a fantastic out-of-character moment. I have so many questions about this. Was he saddened by Kazumi's death, his relationship with Kazuya, or maybe just who he is as a person? Unfortunately, the story mode doesn't dive much into his mindset. They also might have cut that teardrop in the story, but maybe I missed it. So that one clip did its job, getting me all excited to dive into the game, but it kinda backfired since the plot didn't have the depth the scene alluded to. So with that, I think this is the worst intro in the series. The second I see photos drop, I start mash and skip. I know I keep criticizing the serious and less fun intros here, but I'm not completely against that tone if it were more interesting to watch. Due to Tekken Tag 2 bombing hard, the budget for 7 was tightened, which makes sense that they'd rather focus on the big budget FMVs for the story mode rather than the intro. With how this pattern is going, maybe Tekken 9 will have a serious opening that will finally stick that landing. Tekken 8 is certainly a step in the right direction, using butt rock music that's very akin to 5's opening. Despite me calling it butt rock with unironic endearment, it just doesn't hit the same as 5. This song is still tons of fun though. They show some events from the story, but they aren't just ripped directly from it, rather completely different scenes in an FMV format. I'm grateful this intro brings the fun back and isn't all this war stuff. They still have that war aspect here, but it's shown in a completely different tone. Jin is also shown much more throughout, which is great since he's the central protagonist in 8. We see who and what Jin has to overcome instead of like a quick cut of some devil gene thing or him being a warmonger. The motif of the bird symbolizing Jun watching over him is a clever connecting thread. The Tekken series is the gold standard for how these intros should go. Just because the Tekken 4 intro is a low for me doesn't mean that it doesn't have its fans. Even Tekken intros at their worst are better than a lot of others at their best. Pokken being made by the folks who worked on Tekken had me hoping that this intro was gonna bring that vibrant energy. Sadly it doesn't, it's more whimsical sounding than anything. It sells the concept of Pokken by showing that this isn't just a normal Pokemon battle, but rather one where trainers and Pokemon are closely bonded in these faster paced battles. On the DX version released on the Switch, we get a look at the new Shadow Mewtwo, who is positioned as the main threat. It's interesting they blend 2D and 3D art styles together to separate the trainers from the Pokemon, an aspect which carries over to the gameplay. Whenever your trainer is shown, it's as a 2D render. I assumed that it was easier to make 2D art for your custom trainer, who doesn't move anyways, compared to a 3D model. Gotta be honest, I think not having the trainers at all would have been the better choice since they're so irrelevant to the gameplay anyways, I don't see a need. Even for story purposes, there's barely any plot and the trainer doesn't do squat. I think the main reason this falls flat for me is because of my high expectations. Tekken has had legendary intros and I was hoping we would get that treatment here. When you call a game Pokken to evoke the familiarity of Tekken, I think it's safe for us to assume that this intro would have been somewhat like that series, at least on an aesthetic level. Even if we weren't comparing this to Tekken's opening, this is still pretty dull. Soul Calibur is another Namco series that early on established itself by taking you on a grand adventure. The more cinematic scope is enhanced by the orchestrated music used throughout the series. The one game that doesn't really have that tone though is the first entry, Soul Blade. This opening is the first time we hear those iconic lines, and afterwards the song kicks in hard.
Transcending history and the world, a tale of soul and swords, eternally retold.
It mixes elements of rock and what sounds like a more oriental style because of the string instrument, probably a guqing, used as a backing to the track. It honestly feels more like an anime opening with all the excitement. The music still fits the fantasy setting despite being more of a high energy song with maybe more of an Eastern fantasy vibe. The CG models used though seem to be lower quality than something like Tekken 2, but this FMV proves that doesn't matter all too much when the cuts between characters are fast and frantic. There's quick glimpses of story for the characters shown that you would only know the context for by reading the manual. Despite being so brief though, you can definitely still use your imagination on how these events occurred. Out of all the Soul Calibur intros, this one brings the most hype and is one of the better ones in the series. Soul Calibur 1's intro here doesn't bring the same energy of Blade, and that's more obvious with the new song. It being orchestrated now gives that Western fantasy feeling. The song frequently changes in tone depending on what character is being shown, making this more like a medley. The intro is all in-game models, which I believe was done to show what the game actually looked like on the new Dreamcast hardware. This entry at the time was a graphical showcase, so I get Namco wanting to pay special attention to that and foregoing a CG opening. Comparing this to the arcade version, it doesn't look bad, but falls way short in comparison. It looks so slow by contrast, with characters just doing katas on a black background. The home version of Soul Calibur 1 looks more relaxed compared to Soul Blade. The cuts between characters aren't as rapid fire as Blade's, and the music has more of a whimsical tempo, which adds to this effect. The characters themselves don't do much beyond standing around and mugging for the camera. It's a lot of them doing katas with very flat and simplified backgrounds. These backgrounds are at least suited for each character, but they could have flexed the beautiful stages at least. Perhaps being an engine didn't allow for the intro to run as smoothly, or maybe it was a design choice to solely showcase these characters and not let a more elaborate background take away from that. A funny positive of using in-game models is that you're able to rearrange all of the characters in the intro. In the Dreamcast version, this wasn't an unlockable feature. Usually games wouldn't want you to see their characters doing goofy shit like this since it can be character assassination, but we gotta bring extras like this back. If companies were that worried about character assassination, they wouldn't have them in a game like Fortnite doing silly dances. Soul Calibur 2 and 3 go back to CG openings, and they certainly flex that bigger budget. The texture work on some of these models is still insane even today. Soul Calibur 2 had a cool detail where they included the guest character of whatever console you had. Each guest is located in a place that could either be in their world or Soul Calibur's. I think it's somewhat ambiguous on purpose. Spawn's scene shows his cape turning into his axe, which is an effective way to quickly explain why it's missing from his appearance and playstyle. Even though we're never gonna match the excitement of Blade's intro, the slower pace here is used more effectively than the previous entry. A cool visual motif is how various characters have a piece of soul edge, showing that even though they all come from different backgrounds, this one object of power connects them to a common goal. The opening offers an emotional hook, showing each character's personal struggles. I'd consider this a pretty good compromise in place of not having the same energy of Blade's opening, whereas Soul Calibur 1 unfortunately has neither. The fourth entry, Soul Calibur 3, stays with the high-res CG style, but doesn't quite nail the landing like 2. It ramps more like a movie with a slower opening and a focus on Siegfried and Nightmare's duality. The intro begins with a recap on the canon conclusion to the previous entry. The track used is more somber with the violin and choir. It still has a similar music progression from 2, but I feel 3 has the less impactful medley by comparison. There's some striking visuals and incredible set pieces that might even be better than 2's. You've got Mitsurugi and Setsuka setting up for a duel under a full moon while the cherry blossoms are in bloom. You see Nightmare soloing a whole army, now looking less like a Dark Knight and more of a creature trying to escape the armor. Despite the amazing visuals, 3 just doesn't flow as well between scenes. Shots between characters just linger a little too long, on top of the music transitions not being as pronounced as 2's. Going back to in-game models with Soul Calibur 4. Unlike previous entries, I wonder if this choice was less because the intro was designed to be a graphical showcase, or more because of budget issues. Perhaps since they wanted to show off the Star Wars characters, they didn't want to make 2 separate CG cutscenes for their respective versions. Regardless, this one is just okay. All of the characters are centralized in one location with different pairs fighting, all with the goal of facing off with Algol on top of the tower. The Star Wars characters certainly steal the show. They just stand up so much more compared to everyone else. The visual of having Vader's lightsaber clash with a metal sword goes from corny to just an iconic visual. This one clash tells the player, yeah, we know this is goofy, just shut up and enjoy the ride. Broken Destiny, the PSP entry, continues this theme, but has a focus on all new characters, the standout of course being Kratos. Sophidia is so screwed it's not even funny. Soul Calibur 5 is a huge step back. It's Nightmare and Siegfried in a duel, and not a very interesting one either. In-game models are used again, and this time I'm sure it's because this title was rushed, since that's pretty well documented for this particular entry. When writing this script, I couldn't for the life of me remember a second of what this opening was like. Upon rewatching it, I can see why. Literally just a fight between Nightmare and Siegfried, and that's it. I was hoping maybe this was just a long drawn-out build-up to the real opening. It doesn't even set up the time jump all that well either. This is supposed to be an introduction to a new cast where you show them off and let them stand on their own. Even if they didn't want to show off the cast, but rather wanted to present this world through a fight, that's not done effectively either. If this is the time jump game and it's intended for a new generation, this fight is not a good hook for that. This is supposed to be a legendary fight between characters that represent light and darkness, but people aren't gonna care if it's not an interesting fight. This is just boring. This is just my own conjecture, but I got a feeling that they had bigger plans for this opening. Because they were so pressed for time, I figured that maybe this just got pushed to the wayside. For Soul Calibur 6, I knew there was trouble when the narrator couldn't stop talking. It's really difficult for me to say if it's better or worse than 5. They went super budget on this one, and this time I'm sure it's because they didn't have the means to make a more elaborate one due to budget constraints. You've got art with minimal movement and some narration in the background. At least it explains the gist of the story decently, but it is so sad to see how far we've fallen from those older entries. And the wild thing is that this intro only plays once when you boot up the game for the first time. I guess I should be grateful because it saves me the trouble of having to skip it every time. At its inception, Mortal Kombat didn't really have much in terms of intros. The first 3 games just essentially had a slideshow going over each game's plot. The music was pretty memorable to its credit and would show a brief montage of gameplay, but it was nothing like what Street Fighter 2 had. It wasn't until the 4th entry that they actually had some sort of FMV. Unfortunately, it's really boring though, and just Raiden talking into the heavens about that game's plot. Not gonna lie, I prefer the slideshows to this since the visuals there were far more interesting. The environment he's in isn't really all that eye-catching, and Raiden is speaking in a monotone voice.
In a battle with the fallen elder god known as Shinnok, I was responsible for the death of an entire civilization.
The scene is in-engine and isn't even a good showcase of the new 3D graphics since the gameplay would do that on its own. This one is a hard dud. The next entry, Deadly Alliance, was only released on console, this time doing a lore-centric opening making much more sense. Raiden is narrating again, but it's much improved since we actually get to see what he's talking about. Voiced by the late radio DJ Alan Stagg, his voice is amazingly imposing here. I'm bummed this is really the only game in which he got such a powerful voice.
Time after time, each individual threat has been vanquished, and Earthrealm has enjoyed relative peace for many years.
Some crazy plot twists happen in this intro too. Liu Kang and Shao Kahn get offed, which adds a lot of gravitas to the titular Deadly Alliance for killing the main hero and villain out the gate. This was a step in the right direction, but it could still be even better. Which thankfully, it very much was in Mortal Kombat Deception. The first few seconds set the perfect ominous tone with its music. There are quick cuts to a fight we can barely make out until finally the camera zooms all the way to the trio. They're able to pull off having some lore dumps while also showcasing a cool set piece.
The mummified army of the Dragon King. In the end, only Raiden himself stood between Earthrealm and total destruction. Defying the Elder God's wishes, he alone challenged Quan Chi and Shang Tsung in Mortal Kombat, Earthrealm's last hope for freedom.
Deadly Alliance was the first Mortal Kombat I ever played, so I assumed the next entry's plot would have the heroes winning and moving on to the next challenge. To my surprise, this intro showed that they super lost, with Raiden being the last holdout until he went down too. I genuinely thought he died here twice. It's easy to forget, but this intro established in the series that the heroes aren't always gonna win. It also presents Onaga as a new intimidating threat. I think this FMV did more for his positive reception than his actual boss fight. I remember just watching this intro over and over again when I booted this up. It was so cool seeing Raiden team up with the Deadly Alliance even just for a moment. Playing for the first time, you wouldn't know that the narrator is supposed to be Shujinko, who blames himself for being the reason for Onaga returning. Beating Conquest Mode and seeing this intro right after gives us a bit more context and also shows how quickly this occurs after. The fighting can seem a little slow and overdone, but overall I still think it's well choreographed. They could have easily just shown Raiden beaten from the start, but they decided to make it more of a spectacle, and it's better for it. Given its quality, I thought there was no way they could top this intro in the next game, but to my surprise, MK Armageddon far surpassed my expectations. This entry was made to be a capstone for this era of the series before they moved on to the next generation of consoles, being the 360 and PS3. So I'm guessing they wanted to go all out with a bang, having every single character in the series in one big epic battle. Heroes and villains alike face off in different pairings throughout. There's classic rivalries like Sub-Zero and Scorpion, or between Elder Gods Shinnok and Raiden. Even pairings that seem random add to the chaos like Jax and Quan Chi. These battles alone make this intro incredible, but it reaches legendary status once that pyramid pops up and Striker sucker punches Melina. That's when all hell breaks loose, with everyone racing to the top to challenge Blaze. The exchanges of characters getting one over another has the perfect rhythm. Just when you think one character has the upper hand, another takes their place. Of all the people, Shang Tsung seems to be doing the best up to the very end. After rewatching this endlessly, I found some other little details too, like Johnny Cage pushing Sonya off the pyramid, which really shows that this is before the reboot timeline. Also, who I presume to be Taven up top, who you learn is up there to witness the gathering of combatants at the end of the Conquest mode. But there's this war horn here that's not present in the final cutscene, so maybe I'm misinterpreting this event. The Pyramid of Argus, I was stoked to see return as a stage, but the only reason I think it's such an iconic arena is because of this intro. The reboot Mortal Kombat 1 has the climax of its story mode take place here. It's a very cool scene, but just doesn't hit the same as the Armageddon intro. With that game, there was this real sense of a looming impending doom and mystery to what was the resolution of this opening. Did Taven or Dagon intercept everyone and win? Did Liu Kang reclaim his hero status? Or, I guess it was Shao Kahn? Yeah, so the canon answer is Shao Kahn killing Blaze, as we find out 5 years later in MK9's story, which surprises me cause Onaga nabbed the dude and took him pretty far away while being extremely high up. I guess Shao Kahn somehow got away, or maybe it's a body double which he's done before. I've seen this opening 1,000 times and it never gets old. The rhythm and the pace makes this one of the best intros in this genre that I've seen. Man, with all 3 of these openings just getting better and better, I can't wait to see what the next game has in store. And it's called Mortal Kombat vs. DC. The potential is limitless. There is no fucking intro, what did you expect? Mortal Kombat 9 doesn't have a proper intro, but more of an attract mode video, since an intro in my eyes is something that plays automatically every time you boot the game up. An attract mode video is when you stay idle on something like the title screen and a video eventually plays. This FMV is repurposed from one of the game's trailers and thankfully doesn't cut to any gameplay footage. It stays in the high-res FMV style. This swaps between 2 fights, one between Raiden and Shao Kahn, and the other being a tag match with Jax and Mileena and ending with Sub-Zero and Scorpion. I was shocked at the outcome since all of the hero characters lost in bloody fashion. This was the beginning of Sub-Zero constantly getting screwed over by Scorpion and stuff like this. The fatality Scorpion uses didn't even end up being his, but Kano's. Perhaps they just got better ideas for Scorpion's finisher after this FMV was made. After a long break, the next intro wasn't until the most recent Mortal Kombat 1, which sadly is one of the weaker ones. It's just Liu Kang expositing that he rebooted the universe with the Sands of Time. I guess if you bought this not knowing it was a reboot, this was the game just being upfront about that. When the Chaos Reigns update dropped, a new intro did too. It's essentially an interruption of the previous one by the villain Havoc. It's a cool surprise to see the first time, but it becomes just as skippable as the other. It's a shame NRS didn't go hard on the intro like with the 3D era. I suppose they just didn't think it was necessary to spend a lot of money on an intro that people are just gonna skip. That level of effort and energy is exclusively reserved for a game's reveal trailer at this point, which does make sense. But in that case, I just wish that in turn we got trailers that were more than just Scorpion killing Sub-Zero. The original Smash Bros. Uses all in-game footage for probably a couple of reasons. For one thing, being the first game, the budget probably wasn't all that crazy high for something like an FMV. Even if it was, N64 games usually avoided FMVs since they took up too much space on those 32MB cards. With those limitations, this opening is still exciting to see. It establishes that the characters are all toys in some kid's room, which is a good way to explain the crossover without having a lot of lore behind it. When they do a run-through of the characters, you can also see a glimpse of the world that they come from. Pikachu in particular looks extremely small, and that always bugged me, but maybe it's the perspective that's making me think that. The 4 secret characters are briefly shown, but are silhouetted to have their identity be a mystery, but then if you unlock them, they're fully shown. If you didn't have access to the internet at this time, this was the first clue that there were other characters beyond the initial 8. For Smash Bros. Melee, the opening was used to reveal the game's existence, which was mostly shown to journalists at E3 2001. This is also how the entire base roster was revealed, and everyone always points out that one sicko in the crowd that recognized the Ice Climbers. The base roster characters are showcased quickly, and it flows so seamlessly into each section. The Zelda part in particular always gave me chills. Apparently when people saw Ridley show up, they were under the impression that he was actually part of the roster. Listen to this crowd from when it was first revealed, it seems like they're more so cheering for Ridley and not Samus's return. They do cut between FMV and gameplay, which is something that used to bug me, but in retrospect, all the Smash entries do this, so it's not so bad knowing that at least they're consistent. I'm not sure if this is a case where this trailer was repurposed as an intro, or if it was always intended to be the opening of the game. Regardless, this blew everyone's minds. It set expectations for future entries' intros sky high, which in my opinion have never matched Melee's. Smash Bros. Brawl, 3DS, Wii U, and Ultimate all repurpose character reveal trailers to use in their intros. They're fine and convey the weight of these epic crossovers, but they fall a bit short for me. I love the beginning of Brawls, where it shows all the characters you unlock looking at the sunset, though the rest of the clips just seem random. This is my issue with the rest of the games too. The clips chosen just seem less purposeful than Melee's, which is gonna happen when you stitch trailers together versus making a proper intro video. Thankfully, the music in almost all of them are incredible. Each song is unique and serves as that particular Smash entry's theme. These songs typically are extended into the main menus as well to retain that feeling from the intro. Basically, it's the game's overture. They all convey how grand and scoped this crossover is, but again, the problem is that the visuals really don't. I don't know if it's just me, but I really don't like the World of Light song in Ultimate. It just really grates on me. I mash start so I don't have to hear a second of the music welling up. Melee gives a lot of characters time to shine in their FMV. With Ultimate, the base roster is like 70 characters, so it would certainly be hard to focus on each and every single one. To their credit, with using in-game footage, they do quick cuts on what seems to be every base roster character, but perhaps they just could have instead represented the series these games came from. You could show all the Mario characters at once, and then all the Pokemon ones, and then so on. Maybe show all the third parties at once so they're all on equal standing and not just having a few outshine the others. Ultimate mostly has in-game footage, with very occasional trailer footage. Smash intros have definitely gone down in quality from Melee, which is a shame since I'm sure this series has a much larger budget now. I just wish they flexed that a little. This is a series where every single trailer they drop is an event. I really wish that same excitement could be translated to the game itself with an incredible cinematic opening, something to get people hyped every time you boot it up. PlayStation All-Stars took the route of just doing a straight-up music video using a licensed song that I can't play any of. The track used is by Madian called Finale, an electric dance song that's something you'd hear at a club, which can work since this is a big crossover or party of these characters. This intro isn't on Melee's level, of course, but it's actually not half bad. It pairs up characters to their rival in this fighter. Those matchups then transition as an interruption from a new character, never having one person have the upper hand the whole time. This is a clever way to showcase everyone quickly and actually shows all these characters having some sort of interaction with each other. There's a stylistic choice by darkening everyone and just having certain parts of them glow, which I'd argue adds to that party type of vibe and also acts as brand confidence. This darkening of colors mainly highlights a character's silhouette, which is the game saying, you know who these guys are, which is mostly right. I see those ears, that's Ratchet. That cane, that's Sly, that haircut and those gun straps, that's Nathan Drake. Not sure if this method works for every single character though, like Evil Cole, but it proves mostly effective. This is a motif that Nintendo could probably more easily get away with, but Sony has a lot of iconic characters. They just don't flex them like they used to anymore. A fighter on a handheld typically wouldn't go all out for a cinematic intro. If it's on a handheld, it usually means these are lower budget titles or they just needed to save on precious limited space. Despite that, Final Fantasy Dissidia had both entries having some of the most elaborate and expensive looking FMVs I've ever seen in a fighter. The animation is almost on Advent Children level and the music is a grand orchestra and choir. Both do a slow build up with some lore dumps, but then as the music starts to swell up, so does the visual spectacle. The first game has both the heroes and villains in a lineup before the battle begins, and it's just such a perfect setup. I love seeing matchups you would never think to see being a fan of the series, like Squall vs Sephiroth. They purposely rarely have anyone from the same game match up. Makes sense since we all want to see characters fighting people they haven't before. That's the whole theme of the game after all. I will say the visuals in the first entry are a bit dark. With the action being so fast and frantic, this can make some moments a little tough to see. The next game, Duodecim, instead shows each character from their respective entry as it counts up to 13. This can be helpful for people who may not know which character comes from which entry. A good amount of these clips are reused from the first game, but the main point is the focus on the new characters who get more of a showcase than the returning cast with longer and newly made footage. I still get chills when it gets to 10 showing Yuna. No longer on the PSP, the third game, Dissidia NT, is now a console game. Despite this game's many shortcomings, the opening cinematic isn't one of them. This is more akin to the original game, showing the lineup of heroes and villains, leading into them charging at each other to fight. To my surprise, this is actually a shortened version of the full scene. The whole thing recontextualizes everything. You can see it right before the battle with the final boss, and you learn that the heroes and villains are only fighting to summon the final boss Bahamut. They then team up to battle him, which is wild to see. I think this is the only game we would ever see a sight like this with the two sides teaming up. The intro gives this scene, that I just spoiled, a bigger surprise. Making this intro add to the twist is an inspired idea. This is one of the more unique cases of the intro, and it shows that they can be used more creatively than what we've seen before. In this case, being used as a misdirect for a bigger surprise most people probably didn't even see coming. Some regions of the world will change opening cutscenes to better suit that region's taste, or at least what they think are those regions' tastes. Bloody Roar Extreme in Western Territories had a CG opening that looked pretty decent. It's clear they didn't have the same budget to flex like a Tekken or Soul Calibur would. But if you look at Japan, they had the exact same intro but 2D animated instead, which in my opinion is way better. The 2D animation, if we're being real, isn't incredible either, but it still looks loads better than the CG one. Just compare Yugo's transformation sequences. The CG one looks corny and cheap, whereas the 2D one looks more intense and painful. These transformations, I'm guessing, may have been difficult to make in both mediums since there's only one at the end. Still think they could have been more creative with the transformation though. Maybe just show it in shadow or a more abrupt cut perhaps. Why did they bother recreating the same thing in CG? If this was done to appeal to a Western audience, what's the point? If anyone is watching the intro, we can assume that they already bought the game or at least liked it enough to try it out. This is an anime-ass looking game right off the bat. You think that if this opening was 2D animated, they were just gonna turn this game off right away? Like, the game about turning into animals is a step too far when it starts to go anime. Some regional changes make more sense. Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 and 3 simply changed the song. The song in Japan has vocals, whereas everywhere else is an instrumental version, which in my opinion is the superior one. I get the vocals make this seem like it's a new Dragon Ball opening song, but the melody just stands out more when it's an instrumental for both the second and third game. Or you get caught for plagiarizing music and you have to change the entire soundtrack for when the third game got an HD remaster. Oopsies! Tatsunoko vs. Capcom in the Japanese release had an animated opening with the song Across the Border. This starts a bit slower, almost like the calm before the storm in the city, until the song kicks into high gear. It's implied that the characters are visitors to this world. There's static flashing, which seems to indicate that they came from the TV shown earlier. Also, Batsu just jumping from a portal is a pretty big sign. I'm surprised Capcom hasn't done animated intros that often before. Tatsunoko being an animation company, they kinda have to take that route here. The Western release changed the intro completely. The vocals of Across the Border were in English and had an added rap section. It had more of a jazz spin on it versus the more J-rock feel of the original.
You know that you're my kindred spirit. Fly with me, JC, and push you to the limit.
You used to hide behind another face. At first I didn't understand.
The song here definitely doesn't match the quality of the Japanese one, but regardless of language, Across the Border is still a banger. It's the visuals that take the bigger hit. It cuts between promo art of characters and clips of gameplay. It even has brief shots of the original Japanese intro, but it's much harder to see. These effects and quick gameplay cuts make this look way more budget. Don't know why they bothered changing this. I get the song, but they could have kept the original animation. If this was done to show off the added characters, that logic makes no sense since all these guys were new to all the regions that played this version. The original animation was unlockable too, so I don't think it was some kind of licensing issue either. With the first Dead or Alive entry, you had a core 90s vibe, just showing a mix of the roster and their day-to-day and also fighting. For the women, the game displays a love of erotica, showing that even at the series' inception, it knew exactly how to sell itself. These roster clips are very brief, but still provide a decent snapshot on a vital aspect of each character. One funny thing I noticed though is that in the PS1 version of this intro, Zack is getting beat up by pretty much everyone. Why are we picking on Zack all of a sudden? DOA 2 uses a rock song called Exciter and flips between gameplay and cutscenes from the arcade mode. The graphics got a huge bump and the stage transitions are a spectacle on their own, so I get wanting to keep the focus on that. This intro feels super long though. They should have trimmed this down a tad since there's a couple points where I think it's about to end, but then it keeps going. Just like this vid, am I right? DOA 3 is the start of the director favoring a certain band, Aerosmith. I remember booting up the game and hearing a bunch of cats meowing, and I was just bewildered. Can't play any of this music sadly, but as someone who isn't really an Aerosmith fan, these song choices suit the series well. DOA 3, 4, and 2 Ultimate all stick with different Aerosmith tunes, with gameplay being the primary visual. The late Tomonobu Itagaki made it no secret that he was a huge Aerosmith fan, making the band part of the series' identity for a good while. DOA 3 in the US had its opening using gameplay with the song 9 Lives, this kicking off Aerosmith being used in openings up to DOA 4. It's really just a gameplay montage using the entirety of the song's length. However, DOA 3 was released a few months later in Europe and Japan, and with that time gap, they added a CG opening in place of the Aerosmith one. Maybe the Aerosmith opening was always meant for the US only, or perhaps they just needed more time for the CG one and it was cut for the American release. The CG intro was pretty impressive for the Xbox so early into the console's life. This surprisingly though doesn't seem as exciting as the Aerosmith opening. Maybe it's the song not being as thrilling or just the visuals looking slow in comparison to the raw gameplay montage. I guess it's a good sign if the gameplay looks more exciting than the cinematics at the end of the day. This CG cutscene, among other content, could actually be added into the US version. You just had to use a booster disc from the Xbox magazine or a DOA 2 Ultimate. You download the content off the disc where it was only viewable in a menu called Booster. DOA 2 Ultimate returns to a full CG FMV with probably the band's most famous song, Dream On. This contrasts Ayame and Kasumi's early lives until they're grown up. DOA lore is some of the goofiest out there, but this opening makes it look like it's the coolest shit. So I'd say it does its job pretty effectively. These are all the events that prelude the first game, so this can act as a quick primer of the story as a whole. You're essentially getting a full music video here too, since it plays the song in its entirety. The other Aerosmith songs are more party rock, and Dream On would have fit a rapid-fire gameplay montage. A slower, more introspective tone like Dream On has fits the more lore-focused video, and perhaps played a part as to why this is an FMV. DOA 4 in all regions had an opening sequence akin to DOA 3, this time using the Aerosmith song Eat the Rich. It also plays the whole song, and for a title coming out in the launch window of the 360, I think it's better to show off the gameplay versus a CG cutscene. They still made CG scenes for trailers and endings, so I figured Team Ninja felt the same way. With DOA 4, it marked the last time Aerosmith would be used since Itagaki was no longer a part of Team Ninja afterwards. The vanilla version of DOA 5 had a more lore-focused intro using different scenes from its story mode. Comparing this to any of the previous videos, this is probably the worst one. It could have created some intrigue around the plot to entice the player, but speaking as someone who is a longtime fan, that was not the case. Meanwhile, DOA 6 didn't even bother with an intro. It's a pity since there wasn't even a chance to improve on the last one. To be expected, I suppose. SNK were the kings of attract mode. There are so many iconic ones to pick from, all with vastly different tones. Samurai Showdown has a slower and more peaceful attract mode until it suddenly ramps up. These perfectly set the scene to this historic era, being a quiet but deadly one. From the very first entry, Fatal Fury has had every frame bursting with color. Unique sprites were animated just for these intros. They were able to take something as simple as Geese putting his feet up and turn it into the most powerful or farming moment in gaming. Between Sam Show and Fatal Fury, all of these are very brief and simple, which shows how effective they are despite that. Mark of the Wolves is when they started getting more ambitious by showing off large sprite work with more than just one character. There's a focus on Rock and Terry facing off as a passing of the torch. It's surprising that the PS1 versions of some Fatal Fury games have more elaborate openings. For example, Real Bout Dominated Mind has a fully 2D animated FMV, something SNK has done before with their home versions of fighters like the Dreamcast version of KOF 99. Fatal Fury Wild Ambition on the PS1 might have the longest opening out of all of these. At over 6 minutes long, it's an FMV where we watch Terry's father die in the streets, killed by young geese. I'm curious as to how much of the disk space is used for this FMV versus the actual game. With an intro like this, I thought we'd also be getting endings in this format as well. It's odd that just the intro gets an FMV. Overall though, I don't care much for it. Its length wouldn't be an issue if it wasn't so slow and drawn out. There's no music or talking either, it just sets up the main motivations Terry has against Geese, but not anyone else from the rest of the cast. City of the Wolves, the most recent entry, is fully 2D animated and was done by the same folks who did the Fatal Fury OVAs. It has a similar style, but is even more refined. SNK even got Salvatore Ganacci to create a remix of a Fatal Fury 1 song. I'll admit that it took me a while to realize that too. I'm sad to report that this song is a bit ass. For a tune created by an EDM DJ, you'd think it would amp you up more. It just doesn't match the energy of the visuals at all. I know it's a bad sign when I start seeing people putting in other music in this one's place the day it was revealed. Let's be more positive though. The start of this with Terry and Geese fighting is a great inclusion since Geese's death is so pivotal to the plot. It's also SNK's way of doubling down on Geese's death and not doing some cowardly retcon. As the music starts up, silhouettes of future DLC characters flash by with Ronaldo posed motionless in the background. Once he's gone, the song actually starts. It's almost like SNK's in, okay, we showed Ronaldo like we were told, now we can actually start this thing. It just being one frame of him not moving did throw me off. Maybe he had to be shoehorned in last minute. When Ken was released as DLC, to my surprise, the intro was temporarily replaced by a new animation of Ken and Terry fighting on Ryu's stage with a Rock and Ken remix in the background. This was very brief, but a great way to promote this DLC. I had never even considered that intros could be used in such a way. This was done tactfully, and I'm curious if we'll see another unique intro animation like this for when Chun-Li or any other future guest drops. If this outright replaced the original, I'd be less thrilled about it. As much as I gripe about the Salvatore one, I still think it serves as the better intro, mainly because the Ken one is just Ken and Terry. Ideally, I'd want to see as much of the cast as it can fit in these openings.
It all began in 94, kept on rolling in 95. This is where it plays in 96, it came to an end in 97, and now it comes, and here we go. KOF is here again. Nothing's gonna stop us, 1998.
The King of Fighters series has had a rich history of attract modes starting from KOF 94, with SNK showing the prestige of the invitation to the first KOF tournament. This envelope motif seems to have inspired the Smash series when it comes to their character reveals. You get an iconic image of characters all trying to obtain the letter, which Smash plays homage to in Terry's reveal trailer. Just like with other SNK fighters, you've got large animated sprites to showcase particular characters. These are also used to emphasize who the main character of that saga is, with a change in character corresponding to a change in the track mode's aesthetic. Sprite-based fighters in the arcade typically didn't use an illustrated animated FMV since that would have taken more space on the arcade board. That 2D style would fit the art design of the sprites. These animated FMVs are still used in the home release versions of the games. A lot of the times though, I still see these as inferior to the arcade intros. Comparing KOF 94 to its remake, KOF 94 Rebout. The animation is nice but lacks that iconic imagery. It's curious as to why it was even referenced at all. Sprite animated intros had to have more of a money shot. Something that was limited in animations, but still gave a viewer a striking, memorable image. This was something that the KOF series nailed perhaps the best. Something as simple as someone walking is made to be one of the coolest moments I've ever seen. It wasn't until KOF Maximum Impact that they tried a CG cinematic. Wasn't too impressed by this first attempt. It mainly showcased the new additions for this entry, and the rest of the cast is shown with a cheap-looking photo effect. I think that seals the fate of this being mediocre, and honestly, cutting this effect would have elevated it a bit more. And the cherry on top for me is that announcer at the end.
KOF Maximum Impact.
Maximum Impact sequel does make huge improvements, thankfully, by presenting a lot of the characters that most people would want to see, as well as letting the new edition shine. The style is very Y2K, and you've got like a CD player on Nagase's glove. This one goes on for a while too, with each clip just seeming to drag on just a hair too long in my opinion. With a new scene, the music hard switches, so it does come off a bit haphazard. Despite this disjointedness, I did like the switch to the orchestral section, which I thought was well done with the visuals. However, some of the scenes got to the point where I thought the animation was about to end, but no, it just kept going. Despite my griping, this is a pretty good cinematic. When they're not fighting, the characters are framed in a way like they're modeling clothes that makes them look extremely cool, with the camera spinning around them and then zooming in on certain clothing items. The main exception being Ryo, that dude's face just looking a little weird. This was the last time a full opening was a full CG FMV. KOF 14 starts with some CG renders of Kyo and Iori, but then just cuts to gameplay montages for the majority of the time. With KOF 14 having such a nothing intro, I was excited to hear that the director of the Fatal Fury movies, Masami Obari, was doing a special animation for KOF 15. But sadly, that didn't mean that KOF 15 got an intro. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't that animation the opening cinematic? Well, it doesn't play at all when you boot up the game, even if you linger on the title screen. This is a special video in the extras menu, meaning that unfortunately this doesn't qualify. What a weird decision though, this would have been a killer opening. Why didn't SNK just patch it to be one? This video is so effective, I almost thought Shun'ei was cool for a second there. Anime-style fighting games usually lack in elaborate visuals for their intros, preferring to stick to a mix of showing gameplay and rapidly flashing promo art. This style works for the arcade scene since it's quite eye-catching, but it's a shame they don't go all out for a home release. I'm sure it has to do with budget, since doing a fully animated 2D intro is gonna take way too long and cost too much. An intro would be rendered void once a new version drops anyways. A 3D animated one wouldn't be a good idea either, since these are all 2D sprite-based games. It wouldn't be faithful to sell the anime style using CG models. The visuals for all of these start to blend together after a while, which ironically doesn't help them stand out in an arcade. Thankfully, the music is usually incredible enough to help carry these intros though. ArcSys with the Guilty Gear series had their earlier titles fall into this bucket, but with the third game they had more of a lore dump before cutting to gameplay in the second half. Beyond the excellent song, it's not terribly interesting and they don't fully take advantage of their new engine. Using 3D models now would actually work as an intro as opposed to a 2D animated one.
That is bullshit blazing, still my heart is blazing. If the words kill me, I don't need a new one under you. Soon you will know, we already know the smell of the game.
It wasn't until Strive that we finally got the opening we've all been waiting for. This does focus on lore, but doesn't rely on narration, which is for the better. If you know the story, then you'll be able to appreciate and understand the visuals. But even if you don't, what's being shown is enticing enough to pique someone's interest. The song, The Smell of the Game, is one of the most notable pieces out of all of these intros. It's a fast-paced heavy metal tune which oozes the aura of this series' identity. Every frame of this looks like it could be a drawing, and they finally took advantage of the new engine, but now with the identity of a 2D animated one. As we've seen before, after a few new versions, a game sometimes gets another opening movie, but Guilty Gear has not despite years of updates. No one really expects them to do a new video, but it's particularly odd they didn't since they actually did make a new one. It's more of a music video for Soul's theme called Find Your One Way, and this was shown before Grand Finals for Strive a couple years ago. This has the same fantastic production quality as the intro, but it's not in the game itself at all, only on YouTube. So weird that they didn't add it as a bonus video in the gallery at the very least. Maybe they didn't want to replace Smell of the Game since it was so synonymous with Strive, or maybe it took up too much space that they would have wanted. The most likely option is that this probably was never intended as an intro and was just supposed to be a straight-up music video. Despite that, I actually like this one more. It's just a shame that it's relegated to YouTube. Speaking of which, as of me writing this, Riot Games recently uploaded the cinematic intro for the League of Legends fighter 2XKO. The beta isn't open and is on PC only, but I didn't see this video anywhere in the game itself. I assume it will be baked in the game when it's out of beta and on consoles. Regardless, I'm shocked they even have one at all. Being a free-to-play game, I would have assumed they wouldn't have another thing for you to skip to get to the action. For the record, my only knowledge of League is 2XKO itself. Never played any other Riot games or watched Arcane, so I'm in the dark as to the lore here. The intro is a music video focusing on the pair Echo and Ahri. I was told that these characters don't really interact much in the lore, which if true, tells me that this opening wants to emphasize the potential unique pairings you can make, since in a fighting game, you're not thinking about the lore when making a team, just who works for you. There's also not as much of an emphasis on showing the entire cast. Could be chalked up to having a smaller roster at launch, but I personally don't think so. I think this was a very deliberate choice to have a more artistic angle for this opening. What I gather is that both Echo and Ahri are learning about each other by seeing glimpses of their personal pasts. Learning about each other makes their bond stronger, allowing them to defeat Yasuo and Warwick. I can't help but compare it to Multiverses, which was another free-to-play game that emphasized odd pairings. A cinematic trailer would play when you booted up the game for the first time, and I say trailer since it was only the one time it played, not on every boot up. It showed characters riffing off one another by having more dialogue than most. 2XKO I feel is more effective when portraying characters of different backgrounds having to work together than the cartoon game. Brave and profound of me, I know. I'm happy this intro is here though, and curious if this is something that will evolve as the game updates. However, if this is just a cinematic trailer like it says in the title, then this whole section is invalid. So make sure you ignore everything I said, okay? Obviously, I'm not going to be able to cover every single cinematic intro a fighter has ever had, but I wanted to look at the general quality for a good portion of them. These openings seem to have peaked in the PS1 and PS2 era. Back then, it was very common to see a cinematic intro in a fighter. Even the PS1 Digimon fighter had something. Sadly, this seems to be a dying art, with most fighters just not seeing it as something worth doing, especially since it's something that most players will just skip. I do think these still have a place, but by perhaps making it a launch trailer first to get players hyped up. Having it baked into the disc gives us a taste of a game's flavor and vibe. Fighting games are a genre of excitement, and these openings were the best way to act as the introduction not just to that game, but the entire genre as a whole.